foul. 2 balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Welcome up, Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matt Moreno. Matt, 21 games into the season, third best record in baseball, best winning percentage in the National League West. How we doing today? How we feeling a few weeks in?
Still, sort of waiting for the team to hit their stride. And I mean, it might sound a little nitpicky, obviously, because like you just said, they have the third best record and they are, technically in the NL West. But, I know we'll get into it. There's a lot of players who haven't really met expectations yet. There's been inconsistent production. But hey, I mean, could be worse.
Could be worse. Could be worse. I do have to give a shout out to a cool moment for us here at DodgerHeads and DodgerBlue.com. A couple people commented last week. Somebody sent me a note on Twitter like, hey, cool hearing you guys on Backstage Dodgers. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it was random. And so finally I reached out to one of the people and they said, hey, check out Backstage Dodgers. So I'm watching through and they get to sort of the segment of the first episode, which you all should check out, by the way. And as soon as they start talking about Freddie Freeman, it's a picture of Will Smith taking a picture. It's a picture of a video of Clayton Kershaw taking his team picture. And then they break to Freddie Freeman news. And it's our show. Our audio is on there talking about it. We pop up later when he's getting out of a car. So I personally, for me, that was like a huge highlight of, that was a cool moment for us.
Yeah, that's definitely really cool. We have a good relationship with the people at Sportsnet LA. And so that was awesome of them to use that kind of audio. A big moment for the Dodgers, and like you said, we do recommend, if you haven't seen Backstage Dodgers, to make sure you watch that each week, because it's definitely great insight on a lot of the stuff kind of behind the scenes that you don't always get to see.
Totally. And I'll be honest, I not living in LA, not having Sportsnet LA, I see the ads and commercials during games all the time, and I'm like, I don't know, like, first of all, I didn't realize that it's available on YouTube. So even if you don't have Sportsnet LA, you can watch it via YouTube. And yeah, I watched it selfishly this time, and I was like, this is great. Like, I actually want to watch this moving forward. I am sort of slightly curious whether or not our video that we talked about, the A.J. Pollock for Craig Kimbrell trade, I wonder if we get used again, because they hinted at that is sort of one of the bigger storylines in the second episode. So we'll see on that front what happens. But back to the Dodgers. Let's look back on the last week really quickly. The schedule for the show, we'll talk about the last week that was. We'll talk about Justin Turner, his struggles at the plate, kind of one of the big storylines for the Dodgers this season. Max Muncy, Cody Bellinger as well. We'll talk about Walker Buehler, who has become sort of a polarizing figure on Dodgers Twitter. And is he good this year? Is he not good this year? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some random transaction moves that the Dodgers have made over the last week, catching you up on some injured list, COVID list, DFAs, that type of stuff. And finally, the climax of the entire show, Dodgers-Giants 2-game set starting on Tuesday night. We'll preview that a little bit. Let's look at the last week first, though, Matt. Dodgers go 3-3 against two of the worst teams in baseball, the Detroit Tigers and the Arizona Diamondbacks. The offense was a problem, just 20 runs in 6 games. Twice this week, they scored just 1 run. Pitching, per usual, great, 17 runs allowed in 6 games, so a good ERA there, well under 3.00. On the offensive side, some positive performers before we get to the negative performers. Will Smith, my guy, OPS over 1,000, gets moved into a cleanup role. The offense breaks out. I'm not saying that's a coincidence, but I'm not saying it's not a coincidence either. Mookie Betts, a good week, 855 OPS. Chris Taylor, 842 OPS. On the pitching side, Alex Vesia had a good week, 2 appearances, 2 innings, 5 strikeouts. And Tommy Kahnle makes his debut last night, throwing heat, throwing a nasty changeup as well. So 3-3 for the Dodgers, 2 pretty poor teams. Obviously, it's a long year. We're not going to overreact, but not necessarily the week that we had hoped for.
No, not at all. And, last week I predicted a sweep against the Diamondbacks. I think really, the week is 1 game from being, deemed a success for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And the easy one to point to is the Diamondback series, because at minimum, the Dodgers should have won 2 out of 3. Had they done that, go 4-2, you probably feel a little bit better. But I think not only did they lose the series to the Diamondbacks, it was also the way they sort of lost that series was disappointing. Come back against the Tigers, get a win. Then, unfortunately, Clayton Kershaw makes history. The Dodgers couldn't back him up with any offense that night. But, you can't get too upset in terms of the Tigers are a struggling team, but at the end of the day, they are major league players as well. And so if you win a series and don't necessarily sweep, that still is a positive. And so, like I said, it ultimately just comes down to, one more game needing to break the Dodgers' way. And I think people would have been feeling a lot better and different than they do now.
Yeah, I think somebody pointed out that the Dodgers have lost the middle game of 3-game sets like every single time. Are we concerned, Matt, at a lack of urgency in game 2 of a 3-game series? That's the real question.
Yeah, you put that out before they lost the game against the Tigers, because I had noticed, that weird trend, and somebody did respond saying, hey, I don't like that because they start a series with a win and then they relax a little bit. And I was just like, look, I don't think we need to read that much into it. It's a really strange coincidence that keeps happening. We're going to have to wait a little bit to see, because obviously the Giants series is only 2 games. And so we won't find out if the Dodgers can sort of break that streak until the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one last thing on that front. Daniel and I on Friday night, we're doing Saturday night, doing the Kershaw game. Obviously talking about how bad the offense was that night. Mookie Betts leads off with a home run, and they had 3 hits the rest of the game. 2 of them were singles, and 1 of them was a 2-out double. So pretty much a poor performance from the offense. And we talked like, hey, is it time to mix up the lineup a little bit? Is it time to rotate some guys in and out? Sure enough, Sunday, Will Smith get into the 4-hole. Max Muncy gets a day off. Did you read anything into that? Was that just a random Sunday ahead of a day off, or do you think Will Smith in the 4-hole and maybe Turner and Muncy and those type of guys move down a little bit is something that we could see until things sort of normalize?
Yeah, I think it's something we could see again. I don't necessarily know if it'll be a consistent change where, now tomorrow night against the Giants, Will Smith will be back in the cleanup spot. Same thing Wednesday. But it wouldn't surprise me if, depending on, maybe who's starting, who's getting a day off, if he is sort of moved up. And I think that's kind of it's a tricky thing, because on one hand, yes, you obviously want to put your productive hitters at the top of the lineup. Yeah. On the flip side, if you move Smith up to clean up, but then him who maybe is sort of struggling, then he doesn't have, the quote unquote protection. Yeah. And what if, in a scenario, he then gets pitched around? And I think there's just a domino effect that the Dodgers, in my assumption and belief, is that cautious with and mindful of. And it's hard. I mean, I know we're going to get into it. You have, it's not just 1 or 2 guys kind of struggling. You have 3, 4, 5 guys who are sort of, up and down. So, do you make your lineup top heavy? And then what? Like, you're going to get into a scenario where we saw last year when they had to really tap into their depth, where like the 6, 7, 8, 9 guys, because obviously the pitcher were still batting, were essentially automatic outs, and that becomes really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, we talk about, look, the Dodgers have one of the better lineups. Obviously the best, I would say the best lineup in baseball, one of the best lineups I've seen in my life. Mookie Betts, as we said, starting to turn it around. Freddie Freeman has been the Dodgers' best hitter up until this point. Will Smith has been fantastic. Chris Taylor has been fantastic. I think those 4 guys are sort of living up to expectations to some degree. Mookie, you could say, hey, maybe that's small sample size. That's fair. Trey Turner, I would say, is kind of the one guy. Trey Turner and Gavin Lux maybe in the next category of, Gavin Lux, I think all in all has been, as good, if not a little bit better maybe than people had hoped for and expected. Again, a little bit of a roller coaster for him. Trey Turner, batting average is good. The rest of the numbers not very good, and so I would put him in that middle category. But then you've got guys like Justin Turner, Max Muncy, and Cody Bellinger sort of in the former category. Austin Barnes maybe in that category too. Just kidding. But those guys sort of in a different category. So let's transition into having that conversation and talking about Justin Turner, Max Muncy, Cody Bellinger. I put Justin Turner sort of as the headline here because, look, there's no other way to put it. He has been the Dodgers' worst hitter. His OPS right now is below 500. He's hitting, his OPS is 498. That's a 187 batting average, a 232 on base percentage, a 267 slugging percentage. He's in the midst of a 4-for-39 stretch. You look at his strikeout rate, it's almost 21%, which is up about 5% from last year. His walk rate is down 4% from last year. That's a career low. StatCast stuff, bottom 30% in exit velocity, hard hit, all the expected numbers, barrel rate, walk percentage. He's whiffing more. He's chasing more. His swing rate is up 7%. His hard hit is down 9%. All those things are negatives. And here's the last thing I would say, because typically when I've had this conversation, the counter has been, and I have believed it, is, Justin Turner, notoriously slow starter. Nothing to do with age. Nothing to do with the weird spring. He's just a normally slow starter. Well, I went back and looked. Last year in the months of March and April, he had an OPS over 1,000. In the first half of last season, he had an OPS of just about 890. So that's not a slow starter. You go back through his career, 2020, he missed the beginning of the season. 2019, 716 OPS. Again, not great, but, 200 points higher than it is right now. 2018, he missed March and April. 2017, 1.026 OPS. So basically, he has played in 3 March/Aprils in the last 5 years, and twice he's had an OPS over 1,000. You look at his first half numbers. Again, the OPS has been pretty consistent. And so, Matt, I'll come to you. I don't know if the notorious slow starter argument really holds a ton of weight here with Justin Turner. We've asked the same question in 20 different ways. Are you concerned? Stock up, stock down, buying, selling, etc. But where are you at on Justin Turner now, as the sample size admittedly still small, but getting a little bit bigger?
Yeah, I think if there's going to be reason for concern, you could really stretch this out a little bit, like you said, and we acknowledge the fact that spring training, good or bad, needs to be taken with a grain of salt. But historically, he's had very strong springs. He didn't this year, and even the postseason last year was very uncharacteristic for him to struggle. And he, of course, wasn't the only one in the lineup who was kind of going through that. So, if you want to be concerned, then you could look at, hey, let's take it back to last October to now. I still think that potentially the weird offseason, the weird spring training is a factor for kind of the present. I know that last year in Arizona, he mentioned changing his batting stance a little bit to be a little more open. There was some better contact against the Diamondbacks. There, I think there was one drive to center field that would have been a home run at Dodger Stadium and a bunch of other ballparks, but it wasn't at Chase Field. He did hit his first of the season then when the Dodgers came back home. But yeah, I mean, it's strange. It's like you said, the strikeouts being up, his chase rate being up. Maybe some of that could be that, pressing a little bit, as much as he is somebody who has always said, hey, the bigger picture in mind. It's a long season. Everybody is human at the end of the day, and you don't want to get off to a slow start. I guess I'll hold kind of full analysis or decision one way or the other to see, if he did make those mechanical adjustments. To give it a little bit of time. Any player, it's not necessarily going to be a light switch. We saw it with Mookie, where there was talk about him, making some changes, and then he hit the 2 home runs against the Padres, and it was still a little inconsistent since then. So, unfortunately, it's not instant that we'll see kind of pan out all the time. So, another couple of weeks, if he feels maybe he found something now, then hopefully we kind of start to see him trend back up and, hitting at the level that we've all become accustomed to.
Yeah, and I've said, this is a guy who's getting a lot of time at the designated hitter. I imagine that messes up your rhythm as well. You mentioned the postseason. I went back just and looked. Because, again, it's something we've talked about with Cody Bellinger, which is, hey, we could talk about how small of a sample size 2022 is, but with Bellinger, for example, we have all of 2021 to look at as well. So we have a fairly large sample size. Looking back at Turner, you mentioned it, 10 games played in the postseason. He hit 118 with a 211 on base and a 206 slugging. So I went back and said, how did he end last season, looking at this briefly? September, October, he was actually pretty good, hit 260. August hit 216. So nothing dramatic, I would say, in the second half. He hit 241 in the second half last season, hit 15 home runs before the All-Star break, 12 home runs after the All-Star break. That was at a smaller sample size. So we're not looking at a guy who necessarily, was terrible on the second half of last season, and that has carried over. This appears to be something that is new, and 10-game postseason sample size I'm not going to read too much into. And so I've said, I think at some point guys tend to stop. Like, there's a reason there aren't very many guys Justin Turner's age that are still hitting. Some pitchers have been able to extend their careers, but you look at a guy like Albert Pujols. We saw him with the Dodgers last year. His career fell off a cliff as he got into his late 30s. Justin Turner approaching that time. And so we'll see. I think if there's anybody that I think is going to age gracefully as a hitter, it would be Justin Turner because of the way he hits. He's not dependent on speed and athleticism necessarily. But with guys throwing velocity that they are now, and older guys, can they catch up to 98, 99 miles an hour's fastball? That was always the knock on Turner. He couldn't hit the high fastball as he got older. Will he be able to? We'll see. So I'm not ready to press the panic button on Justin Turner quite yet. But I would say the hand is hovering over that button, and the Dodgers time to just at least have it on the radar. And again, I think Will Smith moving up in the lineup tells me that it's at least under consideration. It's something that's on their radar. Let's talk briefly about a couple other guys that fall into the same category. Max Muncy is next on this list. He is in the midst of a 1-for-23 stretch. He got the day off on Sunday. An interesting guy when you look at the StatCast stuff, a 98th percentile in walk rate. That is sort of buoying him up. You can say how bad Max Muncy is. He has a higher on-base percentage than like 70% of the Dodgers roster right now because of his walk rate. But again, 85th percentile in barrels, 98th percentile in chase rate, 65th percentile in expected weighted on-base average. Those are all good. Here's something interesting that I found with Muncy when I was looking at his StatCast page that might explain why he has struggled. Because I look at that 85th percentile barrel rate, and I'm like, if you're barreling at 85% of the time, why are you hitting like one something, right? The problem is 34.7% of his contact is classified as getting under the baseball. That's up 10% from last year. That's a huge career high. And you look at the outcomes. His pop-up rate is up 10.2%, nearly double last season's mark. Line drives are down 10.6%. Ground balls and fly balls both up a touch. Launch angle up 6.5%. And so to me, I look at Muncy, and I'll say this. First of all, it's a guy that we know is coming off of an injury. His off-season routine was very different. Another guy who's adjusting to different defensive positions, playing third base, playing second base, playing designated hitter. But ultimately, I see a guy that's hitting the ball, barreling it up. The expected average is a lot higher than an actual average. He's walking, and it's just a matter of he's getting a tad under it. So for me, I look at this, and this all looks fixable to me. This all looks like I can explain that, I can explain that. And this is a guy who the eye hasn't changed. He's not chasing. He's not whiffing. Because that's the thing on Turner. He's whiffing more and he's chasing more. The swing rate is up 7%. The hard hit rate is down 9%. That's a bad combo. I don't see that with Muncy. So the hand is hovering over the panic button for Turner. I'm not worried about Max Muncy. He's going to figure this out. In a fantasy baseball league, I'm going to go email the guy who's got Max Muncy and say, this guy's struggling. Can I get him on a discount? Because I believe Max Muncy's going to turn this around.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe that as well. I think my only concern and my question is his health, and is him getting under the ball related to his elbow, and obviously having a torn UCL that, he explained not needing surgery because of the way the ligaments ended up resting. And, like we've kind of joked about on some of our other shows, like I'd never really heard that sort of explanation, but okay. So that was my only concern with him is, is it related to his elbow, and is that something that's going to end up needing to be addressed? Because if it is, then he's obviously going to be done for the season.
Yeah. I mean, just to circle back, if we're doing a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being absolute panic, 1 being, how you feel about Freddie Freeman right now, where would you place Justin Turner and Max Muncy on that scale?
I think both at about a 6.
Okay, so you're equally concerned about Muncy and Turner.
Yeah, and it's different. It's different reasons. Said with Muncy, for me, it's more injury driven, and is something up with the elbow? Is it going to prevent him from kind of becoming the hitter that we've seen in years past? And with Turner, it's more of it's an uncharacteristic start for him. But like I said, take it back to spring, unusual, and even the postseason, albeit only 10 games. He is somebody, once October came around, he was, 2 or 3 hits every single game, even if they were, singles to get on base and maybe getting stranded. So yeah, they're both at about a 6.
Interesting. And your concern, just to clarify on the Muncy piece, is not so much like, hey, he was injured, he had a weird spring, but like he still might be injured. Like he still might not be 100% in your estimation. And I mean, like, it's not like you're guessing on that. Like he has said, I don't need surgery, but clearly, like, I don't know how ligaments rest and reconnect. So I don't know when that happens and when you start to feel 100%.
Yeah, and he said during spring that, it may be a year or so until he feels fully healthy, which is understandable. And I'm not necessarily expecting him to feel healthy, but if he also admitted he wasn't 100% sure how his elbow would sort of react once he started facing live pitching in spring training. And so obviously, you want to sort of extrapolate that and carry it into the regular season as well, playing on a daily basis. I worry that maybe, there may be something kind of underlying there.
Got it. Okay, so for me, I've got Turner at a 7.5, and I've got Muncy at a 5. I'm much less concerned about Muncy, although you did a pretty good job of convincing me there that maybe I need to be a little more worried about how his elbow rests. Briefly, let's talk about the third guy on this list, the most confusing guy on this list, Cody Bellinger. Wins NL Player of the Week. We're sitting here a week ago talking about how great he is, talking about how dumb I'm going to look for my predictions offensively of Cody Bellinger being a below-average hitter. And then he proceeds to go hitless in 5 straight games, 0 for 18 stretch. Thankfully, Sunday, he did end the week with 1 hit. He goes 1 for 4, did strike out twice. I don't know. I mean, he's a small sample size king. Like, you could look at any number, and it will make no sense. Again, I'm looking at his stuff. Just this past week, 13 balls in play, but 5 of them are hard hit, and 3 of them are over 100 miles an hour. Strikeout rate, though, 33% this past week. Walk rate, 4%, 36% hard hit. The expected batting average was 216, while the actual batting average was like 048 or something like that. Looking at big picture of the year, again, StatCast is weird. 77th percentile for barrels and hard hit percentage, but he's 7th percentile in strikeout rate. He chases at one of the worst rates. He's 22nd percentile in chase rate. That means 78% of the league is better at not chasing than he is. He whiffs in the 35th percentile. Again, that's a bad number. He doesn't walk, 36th percentile walk rate. So you've got a guy who chases, who whiffs, who doesn't walk, but when he does hit the ball, he seems to hit it fairly hard. I have no idea what to make of all of the numbers I just said to you, Matt.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, even when he won National League Player of the Week, like you asked me, were you surprised? And I was, because it didn't feel like he had a week where, players who end up getting that sort of recognition, like you felt like, oh, they hit 400 and you feel like, every single game they were doing something.
Yeah.
I just keep coming back to, it's going to be a roller coaster with him this season because, like you said, he has the potential. At least he's making hard contact, which is, an improvement on the past couple of years. But the strikeouts are still there. And so that, ends up making things look a little bit worse than they sort of cancel each other out,
Yeah.
I guess, right? Like he's basically back to sort of being a boomer bust a little bit. You just kind of going to have to ride, I describe it other than a roller coaster. I think some weeks he'll do very well and other weeks we'll see like what we just did. It was ironic and unfortunate that he was named NL Player of the Week and he went 0 for 21 until his double. I don't necessarily think or hope, that long of a drought at each time, but I'm with you. I mean, there's no real predicting what you're going to get from him.
Yeah, and it was wild. Daniel and I did the game Saturday. He had this long at-bat, 12, 13, 14 pitches, something like that. And people are like, hey, look at the at-bat quality. He's battling. And Daniel and I were both sitting there. I was super glad Daniel said it because I was thinking the same thing. It's like, yeah, he also fouled off a bunch of pitches that he probably should have crushed. Like a bunch of pitches that were sort of belt high, middle of the plate, inner half, but like not up in the zone or down in the zone. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess like it's nice that he's making contact and not striking out in this at-bat, but like, a couple of those should have been extra base hits that he launches into right field. He ends up taking the walk. So I don't know. I mean, scale of 1 to 10, I'll ask you again. You're at 6 for Muncy, 6 for Turner. Where are you at for Bellinger?
I mean, my concern is going to be probably lower just because I've accepted the fact that this is what it's going to be, right? Like I didn't go into the season thinking, he's going to be somebody who bats close to 300 and is hitting a bunch of home runs. And so because my level of concern then is lower. So, I mean, I guess put him at a 5.
Okay. I mean, so just to clarify, so you have got, if you had to guess, you have Bellinger performing the worst of these three offensively over the course of the season. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm in the same boat. And so that's why, to me, Bellinger, it's like, I'll probably put him at a 7.5, tied with maybe 8. I guess a tad more concerned than Justin Turner. Just because, again, for me, it's sample size. It's like we saw this all of last year. We saw this, all of spring training. We saw this all of the year thus far, that he's going to strike out, that he's going to expand the zone, that he's not going to walk. And again, I think the walk rate is sort of the underrated piece here. You look at all three of these guys who are struggling. They're whiffing. They're not hitting the ball as hard as they want to. They're not making great contact. The one differentiator is Max Muncy walks at an elite rate. And so as long as you can walk, that stuff continues. That's the part with Turner that's the most confusing to me. That used to be part of his game. It seems to be less of his game. He's expanding the zone a little bit. And Bellinger, it's not part of his deal. I mean, like I said, his walk rate is 36th percentile. So it's like if you're going to strike out as much as he does and not walk, and it's a recipe for disaster. And so, there are days I feel really good about my offensive predictions for Bellinger. There's weeks like last week where I feel really bad about it. We're back to feeling good about the fact that I just wasn't optimistic about this year. I wish I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but that's where we're at. Let's move from the hitting side to the pitching side. Let's talk about a guy in Walker Buehler who sort of an up and down start to the year, I guess is the headline here. Every time he pitches, I feel like my Twitter account starts blowing up with people defending Walker Buehler, people talking about how his stuff is down, etc. His ERA on the season is 2.12. He has 14 straight scoreless innings, I believe, is where he's at, including the complete game shutout he threw a week ago. He followed it up yesterday with 5 scoreless innings, 6 hits, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts. Again, the ERA is 2.12. You look at some of the predictive stuff, the expected ERA based on hard contact, etc. is 3.68. So StatCast says Walker Buehler has been one of the more fortunate pitchers in baseball. Let me throw some numbers at you, Matt, with Buehler, and you tell me if this matches up with what you're seeing. Velocity is where we'll start. Fastball's down 0.8 miles an hour. His off-speed stuff is down 1.1 miles an hour. His breaking ball is down 1.4 miles an hour. His strikeout rate is down 4.5% from last year. His walk rate is down 0.5% from last year. So he's walking fewer people. He's striking out a pretty significantly smaller number of people. The velocity is all down. Is that what you're seeing? Does that line up with kind of what you're watching when Buehler takes the mound?
I mean, the velocity, I wouldn't say I've noticed too much of a drop with him, or at least it hasn't felt like it hasn't jumped out like the way with,
and to be clear, like the velocity has dropped. The question I'm asking you is exactly the one you were answering. Is does it feel like the velocity? Do you see it in the way hitters are making contact with his stuff?
I don't think so, but then I guess if you want to then maybe take that a step further, that could explain his strikeout rates being down. Like that has been noticeable. And it could be a combination of things, velocity being down a little bit, maybe not being able to blow pitches by batters as often. The walk rate, I mean, that's also, I haven't really felt much of a change there either. I think with him, it was strange because his first spring training start, he came out and threw like, was it 4 or 5 innings or something great? Like you don't really see that. And he joked that, this is the most, he joked start was the most he's thrown in spring training over his career. But then that was sort of followed with they pitched him in a B game. And so it wasn't necessarily like a full blown progression or buildup. I felt like that you get like with the Cactus League game and all the to just going on the backfield at Camelback Ranch and in a more controlled environment. Yeah. So some of his, I think, inconsistencies, I think, could be explained to just it was a weird spring training, and we knew going into this season that pitchers were going to probably be the most affected by it. I think Buehler also then you layer in the fact that he's somebody who in any season from start to start, from frankly inning to inning, he could decide to change something and experiment with it and see how it feels. After his complete game shutout against the Diamondbacks, he said, the pitching coaches, the training staff, the medical staff, we all found something, made some changes, and that's what sort of fueled that performance. Well, then he sort of lost it a little bit against the Rockies because, yes, it was five scoreless, but that very easily could have gone the other way with another hit there. And, he did 6 hits, but I remember 2 of them in the same inning were like little I think they have exit velocities of like 40 and 50 miles an hour down the third base line. Like it was ridiculous. But, I think it's just, I'm not too concerned with him, and it is strange, but, it's kind of, I think his struggles, if that's what you want to call it, back to a weird spring training.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've said before, I mean, back to my Justin Turner, is he a slow starter? I remember last year having tons of conversations with Daniel on the show and saying, the StatCast stuff, man, the expected numbers aren't great, that kind of a thing. And yet he figured it out. He sort of ramped up and turned it on. And so I think I was expecting, the last night start, for example, that was sort of normal to me. That's when I'm like, yeah, that's where I feel. It's the 9-inning complete game shutout with 10 strikeouts that I was like, wait, I wasn't expecting you to be capable of that quite this early. So then you get your hopes way up, and then he comes back with the 5 innings, 7 base runners, just 5 strikeouts kind of a thing. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? One other set of numbers really quick to throw at you, some control numbers. This was another number that was interesting to me. Pitches inside of the zone, that number is down 5% from last year based on math. Pitches out of the zone is up 5%. That's how this thing works. So do you feel like you've noticed anything with the control? His whiff rate is down. I think that's related to velocity. Swing rate is up. Again, that could be related to velocity as well. But 5% decrease in pitches that are within the zone, is that something that lines up with what you've seen?
Yeah, it definitely does. And he's somebody who in years past, we would see him sort of cruising, and then maybe there would be one kind of weird at bat where all of a sudden he ends up maybe walking the guy or giving up a hit, but then the next batter he sort of gets it dialed back in. Whereas this season I felt like that process of getting locked back in is taking a little bit longer. And even yesterday he started the game with his first, I think one of them was fouled off, but he got ahead 0-2, and all of a sudden his next 4 pitches were all balls. So then he walked the leadoff guy, and that has felt right to me, where this percentage that you give out does match, I think, the eye test.
Good. Yeah. I mean, and it's just a weird thing because, like I said, like we could talk about the control being down. Well, the walk rate is actually down, and so who knows? I mean, it's a bizarre combination of things. I'll ask you the last question here. Are you concerned at all about Walker Buehler? I mean, again, if 1 is Freddie Freeman and 10 is, time to DFA somebody, where are you at on Walker Buehler? Like 3, 4?
Yeah, I'd be at a 3 or a 4.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. It's probably a 3. It's like, hey, it's not, you don't love seeing velocity numbers down like they are. And yet, weird spring guy who historically has gotten better as the season has gone on. I just watched him throw a complete game shutout with 3 hits, no walks, and 10 strikeouts. So I'm not going to be overly concerned there. All right, well, let's talk about the next piece on our agenda here is a roster crunch. And admittedly, we are recording this on Monday. The Dodgers at some point today are going to have to move 2 guys off of their active roster as the numbers go from 28 to 26. They can keep 14 pitchers, so that's 1 higher than they were expected to. This all has to change at some point today. But just going through, we'll get to that in just a second, maybe make just a couple notes. We don't want to say too much and then this be obsolete by the time you're listening to it. But just a few roster transactions over the past 8 days or so that I think are interesting. Last Sunday, Darian Nunez got designated for assignment. This just 1 day after it was announced that he was going to need Tommy John surgery. Sort of a bummer of a week for Darian Nunez. He gets news that he needs Tommy John surgery, designated for assignment by the Dodgers on Sunday, released on Monday, claimed by the Giants on Wednesday, then released again by the Giants on Saturday. So he's currently a free agent. So bummer for Nunez there. David Price to the injured list on Sunday. And then a couple rehab assignments. Tommy Kahnle goes on a rehab assignment on Wednesday to Rancho, is then added to the roster on Sunday. Caleb Ferguson goes to rehab in Oklahoma City on Thursday. And then the last transaction here, Carson Fulmer was added to the roster with Mitch White sent to the COVID list. Zach McKinstry, Andre Jackson, Clevenger, up and down, up and down, up and down. So a lot going on there. But let's talk briefly. I mean, Nunez was on the 40-man roster. The Dodgers open up a 40-man roster spot there that I believe was immediately claimed by Tommy Kahnle. I could be wrong about that. So I think the 40-man is full. Is that your understanding, Matt? Am I right on that one?
I'd have to go back and double check it. I forgot what... wasn't it? I think he came up with David Price. I'd have to double check. I think they used it right away for whoever got called up that day.
I think I could be wrong. Yeah, I think so. I guess it's Maranta. It must be Maranta then that was added. Maybe Kahnle was never on the. Oh, Kahnle wouldn't have been on the 60-day.
Maranta came up when Price went on
was
the IL.
Okay, got it. So you're saying the 40-man roster spot.
Yeah, I should have double checked that before we hopped on.
That's all right. I know this is good stuff there. Anyways, all right, we'll move on from that piece. But so Nunez DFA'd, 40-man roster spot opens up. Price to the injured list. But Kahnle was kind of the big one. Let's talk briefly about him. He appeared yesterday. When a guy gets sent on a rehab assignment to Rancho like he was, that means that's going to be a short stay there. That he's going to be headed up to the Dodgers pretty quickly. We get 1 inning from Kahnle. He's touching 97, touching 98, throwing a nasty changeups. Twitter was loving that. Encouraging stuff from Tommy Kahnle, I would imagine, on your end.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, heading into the weekend, the expectation was Sunday was going to be his final rehab appearance, probably with the Quakes, just to keep him local. So it was a little bit of a surprise that he got activated for the Tigers instead of the Giants, which had kind of been what Dave Roberts said was the plan. When they, in kind of explaining that decision, he said, they trusted that Kahnle he was healthy, obviously, first and foremost, and second, that his fastball command was there. And then, he came out and you saw it. Obviously, starts was great. Nice, like you said, 1, 2, 3 inning, and his changeup had good movement on it. So it was definitely encouraging because, frankly, it's not, I don't know how much people have picked up on it yet. I'm concerned about Blake Trinan from the standpoint that Dave Rice has been, a diagnosis on his shoulder. He underwent an MRI along with Andrew Heaney, and Roberts had an answer for Heaney. He said it was shoulder inflammation. He said he wasn't fully aware of Trinan's diagnosis. Now I'm a little cynical in terms of believing that. I find it hard to believe that both pitchers would have an MRI and you only know one of their the details for one of them. What Roberts has allowed and admitted to is that it is going to be kind of a longer recovery with Trinan than they initially thought or hoped. So now, getting Kahnle back, I think is going to be key. And he is somebody who Roberts said they expect to pitch in high leverage situations. Maybe not necessarily right away because obviously it had been a while since he's been, in major league games, but he will sort of get built up there. And kind of the underlying aspect or factor to keep in mind is Blake Treinen's health moving forward, which is unfortunate. I hope that I'm wrong on that front.
Yeah.
But it's just not really adding up.
Yeah, and that would be a cause for concern. Craig Kimbrell is obviously the closer, but I don't think anybody would argue Blake Treinen is not the Dodgers' best relief pitcher, and so would be huge. Now, I think the bullpen could handle it the way Daniel Hudson has looked, the way that, even Evan Phillips, although his ERA is terrible. I think the way he's looked, Alex Vesia has looked, Phil Bickford has looked, and obviously a guy like Canely as well. Cleaning up the 40-man roster stuff. I think I have this figured out. When David Price goes to the injured list, he does not come off of the 40-man roster. So it was Reyes Maranta that took Darian Nunez's place on the 40-man roster. Tommy Canely was already on the 40-man because he was on the 10-day injured list. Same goes for Caleb Ferguson. So if Ferguson is to be activated, they will not need a spot there. So there you go. So Reyes Maranta has taken Darian Nunez's spot on the 40-man roster, I believe. I'm like 90% confident on that. So the other piece of this, Caleb Ferguson, rehab assignment to Oklahoma City. Good news in that it means he's back pitching and sort of on the track. I would say the move to Oklahoma City tells me, and I think you've hinted at this before, that this might not be like a 2 or 3 day rehab assignment. This might be like a week or two rehab assignment. Is that sort of what you're expecting from Ferguson?
Yeah, I think so. I forget what the details are. I think it could be close to a month that players can technically be on a rehab assignment. I don't know if it's different for pitchers and position players. So I would anticipate that he's on that for however maximum, and then they'll activate him and probably, I guess depending on how the active roster is looking with, health amongst the pitching staff, I think then option him to like OKC and keep him down there maybe until the second half of the season. Just guess that they're going to try to limit his innings.
Yeah.
And so, you don't necessarily want a pitcher up on the active roster who's kind of in that scenario who maybe can only pitch, once every 3 or 4 days because you're trying to sort of save him for October potentially.
Yeah, and you were right on that one. 30-day maximum is the time that a player can be assigned to a minor league affiliate. Good news for Ferguson, he's getting major league money for those 30 days while on assignment. So interesting that if they were going to option him, if that was the plan, why would they not just option him, save themselves a little bit of money? That way he gets minor league money for 30 days. But who knows? Maybe they're holding out hope that they don't need to option him. They can save that move for some reason, or his options or his years or whatever. I don't know. Service time, who knows with that. But good news on that front. The other cool piece, just briefly, Carson Fulmer added to the roster. Did not need to be on the 40-man because Mitch White was moved to the COVID list. You can add a guy from your minor league. So didn't appear, I don't believe. I don't imagine that he will be up for all that much longer. He and Maranta, I think, are probably the guys that would be on sort of the chopping block once 40-man or once rosters have to be cut down. Although they did say they're going to keep 14 pitchers, they have 15. So I would imagine that one of those two guys sticks around. We'll see. But Carson Fulmer, just cool for a guy with his backstory, former #1 overall pick, to be sort of back in the major leagues. His brother, Michael Fulmer, pitching for the Tigers in the same series was kind of a cool moment. So anything else you want to add on just sort of the wave of moves that the Dodgers have had and sort of the roster crunch that is impending?
No, I think the only thing is when they DFA'd Nunez, that was a little surprising. Well, I understood it from the standpoint of, he's going to have Tommy John. He's going to be out for the year. I think it was unfortunate for him because it's kind of like, wait a minute, just because I'm hurt, like now you guys are cutting me loose, because he did pitch well for the team last year. So from a human aspect, like that was unfortunate. And then I claimed him, I thought, well, wait a minute, like clearly, like there must be something with this guy, right? Because I think we have respect for Farhan Zaidi and what he's done up in San Francisco, obviously his time in LA as well. But then they cut him loose. And then I thought, man, like you said, just a rough stretch for him, unfortunately, baseball standpoint. It'll be interesting to see sort of where the dust ultimately settles for him. And we probably won't really know until like a year from now.
Yeah. And it's, my initial reaction was like, why not just move this guy to the 60-day IL and like, then, like he's not taking up a 40-man roster. You move him off of that spot. But, I guess you could say, yeah, but then in the offseason, he's got to be back on the 40-man. And if you're going to just cut him in the offseason anyways, then why bother keeping him around for the next, 6 months, 8 months, however long that is. But yeah, it's a bummer. He just turned 29 in March. So this is a guy that'll be, 30, maybe even 31 years old by the time he next is eligible to pitch. And so hopefully for him, he lands somewhere. Maybe he clears waivers and the Dodgers can bring him back into the organization sort of at a minor league level, and then put him on the injured list and keep him around, so that at least he can get sort of expert care and that whatnot, that kind of a thing. I'm sure there's some sort of insurance deal where if you get hurt as a Major League Baseball player on a 40-man roster, it's not like you just get cut and you're on your own for medical bills. So who knows, but bummer for Darian Nunez. All right, let's move along to the last segment here. Let's talk San Francisco Giants. The Giants come to town, first time this season, a 2-game set, Tuesday night and Wednesday night. The Giants are 14-8. They're a half game back of the Dodgers and Padres, who are tied, even though the Dodgers have a slightly higher win percentage. The Giants, like I said, the Dodgers come in having lost 3 out of 6 to 2 of the worst teams in the league. The Giants come in having lost 3 of the last 4, including dropping 2 out of 3 against the Nationals, who probably are the worst team in baseball, and 1 against the A's. Their roster is an absolute mess. You and I were joking beforehand, looking up all the guys that are on the COVID list, the injured list. Here it is. 5 guys on the COVID list. Brandon Belt, reliever Dominic Leone, Steven Duggar, Mike Yastrzemski, and Zach Littell are all on the COVID list. That's 5. Injuries, they've got 2 guys on the active roster who are listed as day-to-day. Jock Peterson hasn't played since Wednesday. Austin Slater hasn't played since Friday. On the actual injured list, they've got Lamont Wade, Evan Longoria, Tommy LaStella, and Anthony DeSclafani. That's on the 10-day IL. You go to the 60-day IL, and Steven Duggar and Michael Boyd are both on the 60-day IL. Alex Cobb was just activated. We won't see him in this series. He started on Sunday there. And so Duggar's a guy I mentioned. He's on both the COVID list and the 60-day IL. So that's sort of the big picture. If you want to look at stats, the Dodgers are first in the league in runs per game. The Giants are second. The Dodgers are first in the league in ERA. The Giants are fourth. 2 of the better teams in baseball. And on the pitching side, Tuesday night is going to be an absolute ace fest. Julio Urias, Carlos Rodon is the matchup. 2 of the best pitchers in baseball. Rodon is 3-1 with a 1.17 ERA, 38 strikeouts in 23 innings, a .83 whip. This is a guy that was probably the best starting pitcher on the market once Max Scherzer signed, a guy that Justin Norber was on the show. A number of us liked as a guy the Dodgers might go after. When he's healthy, he's one of the best in baseball we're seeing at so far this year. Julio Urias, of course, one of the best pitchers in baseball on the Dodgers side as well. He made 5 starts against the Giants, 3.38 ERA in that one. So we'll get to Wednesday, but briefly, Rodon versus Urias, I have to imagine every Dodger fan is fired up about this one.
Yes and no. I would say maybe a little concerned when you look at his strikeout numbers and consider the Dodgers' struggles on that front. But yeah, I mean, I think we could very easily be in for 1-0 game, a 2-1 game, and then it'll kind of be a battle of the bullpens. And what'll be interesting to kind of see is obviously the COVID stuff can kind of change day to day. Like if you're symptomatic one day, but then sort of clear and you've been vaccinated and boosted and all that, like I think restrictions in terms of coming back are much less and easier. So who knows what the Giants roster will sort of look like come Tuesday. But yeah, I mean, at least I think it should be entertaining, and I enjoy those games. Obviously, it's part of a bigger conversation of, hey, like, are 1-0 games good for baseball? I don't necessarily mind them all the time when it's quality starting pitchers. When it's 2 number 5 guys and neither team can score, then I could see where, okay, like, this is a little boring. But tomorrow night I think definitely should be fun.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. It's exciting from a Major League Baseball fan, but if you're the Dodgers and your lineup is struggling and then you have to face a guy who, look, you could argue maybe has been the best pitcher in baseball thus far this season, 38 strikeouts in 23 innings from a starter. We'll see. It is at Dodger Stadium, so that's good news, but maybe that's an opportunity for some of those bats to get going, to build some confidence, because, hey, you get a hit off of this guy. We'll see. But I don't know. Maybe that's a night off for Cody Bellinger. Maybe we throw Chris Taylor in center field and Gavin Lux out in left field and kind of get Hanser Alberto, the guy who never misses, the guy who never strikes out. Maybe get him into the game and to make some contact there. Wednesday, Alex Wood, the announced starter for the Giants. There's a piece up on DodgerBlue.com talking about the decision the Dodgers have sort of hinted at that they're making for Wednesday. It is Tony Gonsolin's turn through the rotation, Matt, but it sounds like that's not a sure thing, that he'll be the guy taking the ball on Wednesday.
Yeah, so Dave Roberts said, that they're not set on a end up making the start. They could also go to a bullpen game. My kind of reading tea leaves, I think Tyler Anderson maybe is another option because he would be pitching on regular rest since his last start. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know with Gonsolin. I'm not really sure what to make of the Dodgers sort of hesitating to name Gonsolin the starter. I think it's early in the season. It's not late in the year where maybe you're thinking postseason implications if they get a look at him now, is it going to hurt us 10 days from now? Gonsolin doesn't have much experience against the Giants, so maybe it could just be some of his inconsistencies. They don't necessarily want to put him up against the Giants, and they do obviously dig into sort of season how all that stuff sort of plays out as well. And they have an off day Monday, they have an off day Thursday, so if it were a bullpen game, I think they feel comfortable, like you said, even having 14 pitchers, being able to sort of reset and be in a strong position moving forward. If I had to guess, I think they'll go Tyler Anderson.
Yeah, it's interesting because it tells me it's either one of two things. If Gonsolin doesn't start, it tells me what the Dodgers think of Tony Gonsolin, at least at this point in his career. This is a guy that, by all accounts, wants to be just an every fifth day guy, hand him the ball. And Tyler Anderson's been good, but as you said, and he would be on normal rest, but it doesn't sound like it's a decision on that front. And look, Gonsolin, if we're being honest, is coming off of his two best starts of the season. I know last game he actually gave up some runs, 2 earned runs, but from a base runner's perspective, the first 2 games of the season, 7 innings, 14 base runners. That's not what you want to see, even if he gets out of those with just 1 earned run. He comes back against the Braves, 6 innings, 1 hit, 3 walks, 3 strikeouts, no earned runs. That's the best start that he's made this season by far. And then even last week, against the Diamondbacks on Tuesday, 4 innings pitched, 3 hits, just 1 walk, 2 earned runs, and 5 strikeouts. The defense does him no favors there. There's an unearned run in there as well. So should I be reading too much into that of where they feel about Gonsolin? Because yes, he's a prospect. Yes, he's limited experience, but he's 27 years old. He's got a bunch of innings under his belt. So it's kind of like, if now's not, you're the number 5 guy, here's the ball every 5 days, when will it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a fair question. It is weird. It's May. And I'm not trying to downplay. I recognize that every game, quote unquote, matters, obviously, and like we've alluded to in the past,
quote unquote, every game matters.
We learned that last year, right? It was, oh, hey, it's still early, and then come the end of the season, it was oh, well, wait a minute, have they not lost these extra inning games in April or whatever the case was? The division could have been different. It's definitely a fair question. And I don't know. I think maybe it could be that they view it as a bad matchup for him potentially. I don't know. I mean, I was a little surprised to see that, when the probables came out, that they were sort of TBA and not necessarily set. Because I would understand it maybe if you were in a position where maybe Buehler or Kershaw could take the ball and you see an opportunity to potentially, really sweep the 2-game series. But if it's not Gonsolin, the bullpen game obviously is a strong option. I think the Dodgers are a little bit different in that sense because their bullpen is really a weakness, but it's weird.
Yeah, and I mean, look, Tyler Anderson has been good, but I think it's sort of a compared to expectations thing. I think people love Tyler Anderson right now simply because he has been better than they expected him to be. 4 appearances, 2 of them starts, I believe. 2 of them were relief appearances, but has allowed 1 earned run in all of them, has not allowed more than 2 earned runs in any of them. 4 walks in his last 2 appearances, 7 strikeouts in 9 2/3 innings. So he's been good. He's been solid. I mean, let me ask you this. If you needed to win a game tomorrow and you could throw Tyler Anderson or Tony Gonsolin out there, who would you choose?
Oh, man, that's tough. I think I honestly would go Anderson. Okay. But that I think is just also in a vacuum right now, sort of looking at how both have hit this season. In terms of potential and upside, I mean, I still think Gonsolin, he was a prospect, and, I still think he has a little higher ceiling. We just haven't necessarily seen him get there consistently.
You keep in mind Anderson has that University of Oregon pedigree as well, and so you got to love everything coming out of Eugene. But
then I'll have to change my answer now since you reminded me of that.
Tony Gonsolin, you a big where did Tony Gonsolin go? It's like a junior college or something like that, right?
St. Mary's or something. But no, it's just USC fan not liking anything Oregon.
Yeah, St. Mary's. You're right. St. Mary's was where he went. Gonsolin did as well. But yeah, I mean, look, everybody, if you've watched this show, I'm pro Gonsolin in every step of the way. And so I go with Gonsolin. It's disappointing to me that he's just not being named the starter. I think you make a good point that maybe the Dodgers just say, who gives us the best chance to win? And if it's possible, it's a bullpen game. I think if they choose Anderson, they're telling you what they think about Tony Gonsolin. But if they go bullpen game, I think you could at least justify it in your mind and say, hey, off day Monday, like you said, off day Thursday, if we could get, 9 innings from a group of guys that includes Kimbrel and Hudson and Vesia and Bickford and Phillips and, you just go straight down the list, Canely, then, yeah, I feel really good about that group. Although even in a bullpen game, typically you have a bulk guy who gives you 2 or 3 innings. So we'll see. David Price on the injured list, he would be a candidate for something like that. I can't imagine, though, that they would go like Andre Jackson or Mitch White's on the COVID list, so he's not eligible. So we'll see. Fascinating, sort of a bizarre Wednesday, like fascinating decision for the Dodgers to make. And who knows, maybe they're just screwing with the Giants and it ends up being Gonsolin and he goes 5 innings and this is all gamesmanship or something dumb. But that's not really the Dodgers' MO. What was it last year? Dave Roberts told Gabe Kapler, called him the night before, hey, here's what we're doing. So, that gets Dodger fans fired up. So there we go. So 2 games against the Giants this week. We're not really going to get a chance to talk about the rest of the Dodgers schedule. But they do have a 3-game set with the Cubs, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I believe, as well. So there you go. Yes, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They do have Anderson currently listed as the starter Friday. So I suppose if Anderson doesn't pitch on Friday, if he pitches Wednesday, then maybe Gonsolin would pitch Friday in Chicago as an option there. So 5 games for the Dodgers this week, 2 against the Giants, who are one of the better teams in baseball. The Cubs 9-13 on sort of the lower end of teams in baseball. Apologies to the Reds, by the way. They are definitely the worst team. I think I called the Nationals the worst team. It's definitely the Reds. They're 3-19. They're atrocious. But the weekly game, Matt, that you and I are terrible. 5 games for the Dodgers this week. Give me a win-loss total.
I'm going to go 3-2, and I think they end up splitting with the Giants and then taking 2 of 3 from the Cubs.
Okay. I'm going to go bold here. I'm going to go 4-1. I think they split with the Giants. I think they lose Tuesday. I think they win Wednesday, and then they sweep the Cubs. So that's my prediction. Let us know, as always, what you think in the comments below. We appreciate that. Thanks, everybody, for watching, for listening. If you're checking us out via podcast, thank you. We are now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, I believe Google Podcasts as well. Just search DodgerHeads. We say it every week, but it's a huge help to us if you wouldn't mind subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more people will find our show a little bit easier, so we appreciate that. If you're checking us out on YouTube, please subscribe, ring the notification bell. And check out DodgerBlue.com. We kind of hinted at the Dodgers have some roster moves they need to make at some point on Monday ahead of Tuesday's game. And so DodgerBlue.com will have all the latest news on that front, which 2 guys get optioned. We're guessing it's 1 pitcher, 1 hitter. I suppose it could be 2 pitchers optioned and then 1 pitcher recalled, maybe an Andre Jackson or something if they do want to go bullpen game. We'll see. Lots of options for the Dodgers there. But check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958. And hey, give Matt Moreno a follow there on Twitter at mmoreno1015. I'm at Jeff Spiegel. So we appreciate you joining us. As always, tons of content to come this week, so stay tuned with us. But 2 games against the Giants Tuesday and Wednesday should be good ones. We'll see you next time.